Hello everyone, Dr. Mike Gerhard here, TCOM 408. Thank you for joining me today. In this video, we want to continue our discussion of the three basic ethical perspectives, and now it's time to focus on consequences, outcomes, results. So let's talk about consequentialist theories. Sorry, Kant. I respect your obligations, your duties, but outcomes matter. Consequentialism holds that the consequences of a particular action form the basis for any valid moral judgment about that action, the outcome, the results. From a consequentialist standpoint, a morally right action is one that produces a good outcome, a good consequence, a good result. Another way of looking at consequentialism is referred to as the ends justify the means. The ends are the outcomes or the results. Now, utilitarianism is one consequentialist theory. Utilitarianism is a moral theory that says the morality of actions depend on the results, the outcomes. Utilitarianism is the idea that the moral worth of an action is solely determined by its contribution to overall utility, that is, its contribution to happiness or pleasure as summed among all persons. The most famous advocate of utilitarianism was the philosopher John Stuart Mill, and he developed the principle of utility. The principle of utility, this is the idea that ethical behavior arises from that which provides the greatest good for the greatest number of people. The greatest good for the greatest number. Said John Stuart Mill, an act's righteousness is determined by its contribution to a desirable end, a desirable outcome. Now, what's the problem with consequentialism? Well, one problem is that it's really hard to predict outcomes. We're often speculating about what the results will be. Another problem with consequentialism is that it may force us to compromise or to violate some basic principle in order to achieve an outcome. Now here's a very related approach to utilitarianism. This one is known as situational ethics. This is widely pervasive. This is probably how most people operate in their personal and professional lives, making decisions based on situational ethics. So situational ethics is really a teleological, a consequentialist theory, and it's concerned with outcome and consequences. Okay? It's not concerned with duties or obligations or moral absolutes. In the case of situational ethics, the ends can justify the means. Situational ethics takes into account the particular context of an act when evaluating it ethically, rather than judging it according to absolute moral standards. Okay, this is also known as the doctrine of flexibility. Flexibility in the application of moral laws according to circumstances. Moral flexibility, is it a blessing or is it a curse? Does moral flexibility constrain our moral compass? Does it prevent it from always pointing in the right direction? Hey, as one person said, if it weren't for situational ethics, I'd have no ethics at all. Now, in many situations, people will not be thinking about others. Unfortunately, people will consider self. What's best for me? Will I get caught? Will anybody see me do it? Oh, everybody does it. I'm not as bad as other people. Or it's too scary to take a stand, to act on principle. Now, of course, not all the decisions based on situational ethics are completely about self. Sometimes the decision is based on concerns about others, the greater good. For example, dropping an atomic bomb on the Japanese. Okay? Not an ethical thing to do, but it did prevent further bloodshed and saved millions of lives. The outcome mattered. Here's another perspective based on the idea that everything's relative and it depends on the circumstances. It's called cultural relativism. And it's the idea that the right thing to do in a situation will depend on the culture which you're in and what the cultural norms dictate. So this suggests that it's okay for different countries to have different moral values. Now, do you believe in cultural relativism? In certain matters like clothing and language and some other, cultural things. I don't care. Let people celebrate their own cultures. But what about human rights? Things that maybe should be universal, the right to have an education, the right to think, the right to have a free media, the right to free speech, freedom of religion, freedom of movement, association, assembly, gay rights, all sorts of human rights. Should those all be relative and depend upon the culture? Some people believe the idea of cultural relativism is nothing but an excuse to violate human rights. You will have to come to your own truths on the idea of cultural relativism. Let me give you a final perspective here. It's called communitarianism. And this is an ethical perspective that asks, what's best for my community? It's focused on the entire community instead of the individual. And maybe people reject this because it sounds too much like communism. But no, it's not the same thing as Marxism. Communitarianism emphasizes the need to balance individual rights and interests with that of the community as a whole. It suggests that we have to think of the community as a whole sometimes. Communitarians assert that autonomous selves don't exist in isolation. They're shaped by the values, cultures of the community, and community matters. So communitarianism is an ideology that values the needs or the common good of the community or the society over the needs and rights of the individuals. It's more community-based than individually based in its focus. Communitarians assert that when issues are social and political, community trumps individuals, but doesn't trample them. So this is putting us first and we first sometimes instead of me first. I think a good example of this is the whole issue of wearing a mask during a pandemic. A communitarian would say, of course you should wear a mask because it's in the best interest of the community and the greater good, and your individual preferences don't really matter. What matters is the good of the whole. So to sum up here, I want you to remember this. Ethics is not a science. There's no algorithm for making an ethical decision, at least not yet. Maybe someday artificial intelligence will have a consciousness and a soul and a set of moral values. But for right now, humans make these decisions. And no ethical theory is perfect. This is often more of an art than a science. What's important here is to learn to think for yourself, to make your own decisions. Letting others think for you is tantamount to letting yourself become a slave to their thoughts and their desires. And we know what can happen when we become a slave to other people's interests and thoughts and desires. In a free and democratic society, the citizens, not just the philosophers, should take responsibility for deciding what's good and right. It's each of our duties to play a role here. So, to summarize the ethical perspectives, we've got the virtue ethics, Aristotle, the golden mean. We've got the duty-based ethics, Immanuel Kant and the categorical imperative. And we've got consequentialist-based theories, such as Mill's principle of utility. So, I've presented all of these ideas to you. Okay? Your job when looking at your case study or an ethical dilemma is to think about these various viewpoints, the wisdom of the ages, and to see if any of these apply when you're making your ethical decisions and if they can help you justify your ethical decisions. So use these ethical viewpoints in your decision making and your class assignments. Apply this knowledge about ethics. Now, two other categories of ethics that are really important to me and in this course: social responsibility ethics, the idea that we should often do what's in the best interest of society, and something called professional ethics. What would our professional colleagues and peers think in a given situation? Now, professional ethics are the principles that govern the behavior of a person or a group in a business environment, in a professional environment. One of the earliest examples is the Hippocratic Oath, to which all medical doctors still adhere to this day. Most professionals have developed codes of ethics. Many industries and professions have codes of ethics that the members of the profession are expected to follow. Here's a brief example. Think about advertising. Billboards, the Out-of-Home Advertising Association of America is the professional group that represents the billboard industry, and they've adopted a set of voluntary industry principles or a code of ethics. Here's a summary of some of the main concerns raised in the billboard industry's code of ethics: respect for privacy, protect the children, support worthy public causes, respect the environment. A few of the principles that are supposed to guide the billboard industry. You should also always consider the doctrine of social responsibility. That's a self-regulating business model that helps a company be socially responsible. Okay, the idea of social responsibility is to consider the obligations of the company to itself, to all of its stakeholders, including the public. So social responsibility theory means in the normal course of business, a company is operating in ways that enhance and help society and the environment instead of contributing negatively to them. So what's in the best interest of society and the environment? All right, I hope that you got something out of this video. Please take the knowledge that we've talked about in the last several videos and try to apply this knowledge in the class and in the course of your lifetimes. All right, continue to take care of yourself and each other, and I shall see you soon, I hope. Take care.